The coffee chat this week is about the use of slurs in literature, particularly the F word for queer masculine people. The opening section also includes an anecdote from my life that revolves around the N word. You will not hear either of those words in this discussion, but it will be an in depth discussion, particularly about the F word. I wanted anyone watching this video to have that context right at the beginning so that you know what you're getting into and you can make a choice about whether you want to continue. If you do want to continue, let's begin. Good morning. Today we're going to talk about slurs. Light topic for a Tuesday morning. The central subject of this discussion is going to be about the use of the F word for queer masculine people. But before I get into that discussion, I wanted to take you back nearly 20 years. It's my freshman year at college. I'm in an intro to political theory and political philosophy class, and something happens. We are in the middle of a multi-class discussion about language and communication and libertarianism and socialism. And at the beginning of one class, our professor comes in and tells the room, I am going to make you all feel something. And then, with quite a lot of venom in his voice, he uses the N word. It is an indelible moment in my life. I remember exactly in the room where I was sitting. I remember exactly how I felt. Hot, anxious feelings shooting up the back of my neck, wanting to get out of there. I couldn't believe what he had just done. There were literal gasps in the room. The entire room reacted. The purpose of doing this, so says the professor, who shall remain nameless, was to prove that words can hurt. And to this day, I am deeply conflicted about this exercise. Today, I don't think that a university professor could do something like this at all, or at least not without some kind of warning ahead of time. And even if they wanted to, I think that it is probably ill-advised. But for a group of 19-year-olds, and I will say, mostly white 19-year-olds, but there were black people in that class. It was a class of almost 300 people. That was a shortcut to getting us to understand what he meant. And if he had spent an entire class discussing the intellectual history of the violence of language and given us like philosophical and theoretical readings, I'm sure that intellectually we would have come to understand that, but nothing could have made us understand it more than him just saying it there. Other people who had taken that class knew about this thing that he did. It was almost like it became sort of a little community of people who took political theory in school that, like, oh my God, have you had that class yet with that guy? It was certainly deeply affecting to everyone in the room. But as I have had distance from that moment, the thing that stuck with me the most was not necessarily the magnet snapping together of me realizing what he meant by saying that words can do violence, but it was instead the bare fact of a white man saying that word in a room that had black people in it. Whatever feelings that I was feeling were nothing in comparison to the feelings that those kids in the class were feeling. And I'm certain if you asked every single one of them, every one of them would have had a different opinion about what had just happened. But everyone in that room that day, regardless of their race, certainly would have said the same thing, that they felt disgust and anxiety and perhaps even some amount of humiliation. The most common thing that people, myself included, have said about that exercise is that him saying the word made us feel like we had gotten slapped. That is the power of certain words. And now, having almost 20 years to reflect on that experience, the thing that stands out for me the most is that it wasn't his word to use. And it's because words like the N word or the F word are wielded against marginalized people. There really aren't words like that for cis, straight, white men. So yes, there are other words that he could have picked. He could have used the F word. He could have used the C word that is used to demean women. And none of them would have been his word to use. So I feel complicated feelings about that exercise. I do think that it was uh, not necessarily an elegant way, but an efficient way to communicate an important idea. But at the end of the day, I am left with this thought, this feeling of, I didn't like it. I don't like that he did that. And as a little coda on that anecdote, I ended up being on an advising team with this guy several years later, coaching and onboarding new freshmen into the university. So it's not like we became bitter enemies after this experience. That is a little bit of background as we come to the broader discussion today about the use of the F word in literature, particularly queer literature and romance specifically. I have been thinking and stewing about this because of Rachel Reed's Game Changers series. Reed uses the F word written out in the first two books of that series, and I noted it and complained about it in both of my videos about those books, Game Changer and Heated Rivalry. And without going back and rewatching my videos or going into my notes, I'm pretty sure I remember or can predict what I said both times, which is that it was notable and I didn't like it. And I would be surprised if I didn't say that it wasn't her word to use and that I don't like it when people who were not or were never subject to that word use it in any circumstance. But I also just read that word again in the past week in Lavender House by Lev A.C. Rosen. And I had different feelings about its use in this book. So I wanted to unpack that. Now, before I get into the various lenses that I'm taking to look at the F word, and before we take a look at the specific sections of both of these books where it's used, I wanted to preface this by saying that there is no right or wrong answer here from my perspective. And specifically, what I am about to say is not a prescription. This is not something that you should or shouldn't do in all cases. This issue exists at the intersection of multiple spectrums, and I think everyone, both authors and readers, are going to and have to find their place on those spectrums before they evaluate things, and that is subjective. So I'm going to describe those spectrums as I see them, and I'm going to say where I fall on them and how the use of that word in these two passages lands for me, but you may feel differently. I hope that describing these different spectrums, these different lenses for how we can understand the use of words like this in literature are helpful thinking tools for you. But I'm not saying, one, that you have to see works through these specific lenses yourself, and two, that if you do, you don't have to fall exactly on the same place that I do. This is also a very freighted and loaded and potentially quite difficult conversation, so I will be particularly on guard on the comments of this video. Also, if you want to have a little bit more of an open discussion about this, but in a closed and private environment, you can go to my Bindery page and sign up for the free tier there, and that will get you access to the tongue-in-cheek Discord, where we have a very cool group of people who are open to discussing issues like this, and there will be a thread in the coffee chat discussions channel where you can unpack your feelings in a safe place. All right, so first I'm going to describe different lenses through which I understand the use of the F word in literature, and then we'll apply them to these two passages. So the first lens is the lens of disgust, of anger, of feeling slapped. It is the lens that I came to understand being in that classroom 19 years ago. Not everyone agrees that this lens exists at all, and people are going to find themselves on different positions on this lens as a spectrum, given their lived experience. If you think that words never can do violence, that no one ought to feel slapped no matter what word is used, I strongly disagree with you. And I don't know that we will be able to have a productive conversation if you think that no words and no language can do violence. I think more likely people will see the spectrum there and they will find themselves on different points of it. And I think that the different points that people find themselves on may be, like somewhat non-intuitive. So I would not be surprised at all, for example, if many of my like cis male gay colleagues find themselves way to one end of that spectrum of saying like, oh, it's not a big deal. I don't care who uses that. I don't feel very much like violence there unless it is, someone specifically calling me that word in like the like traditional meaning of it. Like, I don't care about it. And I think that it is also incredibly likely that there are like queer allies who've never been called that word before, who are even more like hurt by hearing it or reading it than I am. Nevertheless, everyone is going to find themselves somewhere on that spectrum of feeling that words are violence. The second lens is the lens of reclamation and queer liberation and play and friendship. So you may be wondering, you may be asking yourself, Carter, do you use that word or the diminutive of it with your gay friends? And the answer is, yep, I sure do. I have called myself that. I have called my friends that. I don't use it all the time, and it is not like the most common thing that I would call someone. But yes, I am of the position that that is a word that queer masculine people who have been subject to that word uh, can and have reclaimed. And just a little side tangent on when I say subject to that word, there's quite a big umbrella of people who might be subject to that word. So cis gay men, certainly. Trans women and masculine non-binary people also probably have been or could have been called that word at some point in their lives. Certain masculine presenting cis women may have been called that word in their lives. So I don't think the F word as a slur is exclusive to cis gay men. Cis gay men are certainly the vast majority of people who have probably been called that word, but they're not the only ones who could be called that word. So we might call this lens of reclamation or play the lens of ownership. Who owns that word? And the point that I'm making is that it's a fairly broad spectrum of people who can own that word. And the purpose of that word as a slur is to humiliate and diminish and to demean someone. And you don't even have to have ever been called that word to feel the violence and the power of it. That is a point that one of these books actually makes, because I think the author has probably been called that word before, or has at least thought pretty deeply about the violence of that word. The third and final lens for understanding the use of the F word in literature is more of a literary lens. So it's the lens of verisimilitude, of genre, of character, and narrative intent. Perhaps you have crafted a character, like a bad guy character, who anyone would think, yeah, they definitely would use that word. Perhaps you have put your characters in an environment, a homophobic environment, like, let's say, the National Hockey League, where you just know that word is thrown around a lot. Perhaps in the story that you're telling, it's very important that one of the characters is called that word. Maybe you're writing a dark, gritty book, and it's reflecting and describing a mean and nasty world. So depending on the genre and the characters that you create and what kind of world you are trying to describe, it may be more or less likely that characters would use that word. But also, these lenses intersect, and depending on who you are as an author, you may craft that world, but thinking about ownership of that word and how that word can do violence to people, you may choose or not choose to write it out. There are ways that you can use that word without using that word. You can say the F word instead of writing it out. You can have kind of sly phraseology, which I think Rachel Reed also ended up using in later books about, a slur was thrown around, or like that word that we all know. When thinking about this like literary lens, it also, again, as like a little side tangent, makes me think of Stephen King. Stephen King, to me, and I'm just repeating something, a point that I made in a TikTok that if I can dig up, I'll put it in the description. But he strikes me as the kind of white liberal boomer who just really likes to use the N-word and really doesn't like it when people tell him he can't. So he uses it a lot in his books. And the book that I was criticizing its usage of in that TikTok is Mr. Mercedes, where the bad guy, the objectively awful, evil bad guy, is super racist and he uses that word all the time. And I can just, see the gears in the mind of someone like Stephen King that, like, oh, well, like, I can't be racist because I'm making the bad guy racist, right? So now I can write that word in his voice, like, over and over and over again. So, like, that literary lens is, perhaps there is a fourth lens here, which is just like the lens of the personal experience of the author. And that kind of intersects again with ownership of that word. But like, you can kind of tell when an author cares or doesn't care, or wants or doesn't want to use certain language. So anyway, let's get to the two passages that I want to take a close look at in Heated Rivalry and Lavender House and apply some of these lenses to them and see where we come out. So let's start with Heated Rivalry. This passage comes at the beginning of part 3 in chapter 12. So this is Ilya's perspective. He's in the middle of a game. And at the beginning of this chapter, we get a little bit of like table setting for what is about to happen. Ilya smiled to himself. He actually loved this. He loved being on the road and disappointing home crowds across North America. He loved the insults, the booing, and most of all, the sound of a crowd so gutted by his team's performance that they couldn't even bother to boo. A winded, humiliated crowd. That was Ilya's favorite sound. So we are establishing right at the top that Ilya likes to be insulted. We also, after 11 chapters, know that he is probably a little fruity, given the extracurricular activities that he has been getting up to with Mr. Shane Hollander. A Philadelphia defenseman skated by the bench when the play had stopped. "Keep it up and see what happens, Rosanov," he threatened. "I know what will happen. My team will win." "Suck my dick, Rosanov." And then Ilya thinks, "Be the best blowjob of your life, sweetheart." Ilya winked at him. The other player grumbled. Ilya shrugged. It was half true, maybe like 30% true. All right, so let's take a step back and think about the various lenses that we've established here. First, words as violence. So I will just say, anytime I read that word, in any circumstance, I feel the violence of that word. It was also thrown at Ilya in a violent way. He'd already thrown a homophobic insult at Ilya by saying "suck my dick," and even at this early point in the Game Changer series, if you don't know anything about hockey, it's been well established for you in Game Changer and the first 11 chapters of Heated Rivalry that the NHL is a homophobic place. This Philadelphia defenseman is not saying "suck my dick" like in a positive way, and he's not saying the F word in a positive way. And did Ilya feel the violence of that word? Probably, but it just doesn't get under his skin, and this is meant to be like a character moment for him. So this gets into the like literary lens, which is like, what is the intent of this passage? The intent of this passage is to show two things. One, that Ilya is cool and that he doesn't let words like that affect him. And two, to about a third of the way through the book, like start to be more tipping the balance of Ilya's thoughts about his sexuality and his relationship with Shane toward like in an explicitly queer direction. That he is thinking it's half true or 30% true. Like, yeah, I'm probably bisexual. Maybe, that word does apply to me. Finally, thinking about like ownership over that word and reclamation, it's definitely not used in the text in that kind of a way. The character, Ilya, is increasingly identifying as a queer person at this point. So it is his word to identify or not identify with. But it's not Rachel Reed's word to reclaim or identify with. So where do I come down on the use of this word in this part of Heated Rivalry? I don't like it. I think just saying "suck my dick, Rosanov" accomplishes almost everything that you want to do there. And it just like putting that word in there, I'm looking at it in my notes right now, and it's just like I can feel like my guard up back here. Like I can feel it. And it makes me feel bad. I don't like that it was used there. I don't think it was necessary to use there. I don't think it was Reed's word to use there. It doesn't make me feel like we, the author and myself, are part of some allied community through her usage of the word like that here. And I think some of that has to do with the genre, that this is like, it's not like a cozy, fluffy romance, but it is a romance book. So yeah, I don't like it. Let's contrast that with the usage of the word in Lavender House. So while Heated Rivalry is an sports romance, Lavender House is a queer, like private detective, a mystery thriller. The main character is Andy Mills. He is a queer former cop. He got booted out of the San Francisco Police Department in the early 1950s for being gay. He was at a bar that got raided, and he literally got caught with his pants down and was drummed out of the police force. He is now working a case, and while working a case, he is at the local coroner's office because he wants to get some information about a dead body. And I'm going to read a couple different passages from chapter 5. Chapter 5. This is after the coroner has found out from some other detectives on the San Francisco police force that Andy is gay. Don't give him anything, the coroner hisses. He was fired from the force for being. I turn and leave. I don't even think about it. My feet take over and run away from me like a rabbit when a wolf looks in its direction. I get downstairs and back outside fast, practically running down the stairs and bursting out of the door like I was drowning. Outside, I bend over, trying to catch my breath. I'm winded the way I've only been from being punched in the stomach before. My hands are shaking a little, but I manage to get into my car, open the glove compartment, and light up a cigarette after a few minutes and only a little fumbling. I suck the smoke down and it calms me a little. So immediately, Andy has felt the violence of this word. But this goes on. I've never been called that. I've never seen the look in a man's eyes when he spat that word at me. When the guys at the station brought in other queers and tossed the word around, it was never at me, or if it was so I could catch it like a ball and throw it back at them, like a game I was a part of. Once they knew, they didn't even look at me. No one said a word as I was marched out. But now the ball has been thrown directly at my chest and it's hit hard. I have to remember how to breathe. Without meaning to or wanting to, I think of other people calling me that. Guys on the force I had beers with, guys I served with, my best friend from high school, my mother. I imagine each one of them knowing right away if they'd shout it or hiss it or whisper it in horror once they knew, because they could know now. It's something out there spreading like a disease, and I don't know who's going to find out next, who's going to say that word at me next, and if it will be the last word they ever say to me. My mother would say the word in shock, I think. She'd turn away and cry if we were in person, but we haven't seen each other in a while. She'd probably call. She'd cradle the receiver in both hands and say it into the wire, and I wouldn't say anything back, and then she'd hang up. All I'd have left of a family would be the empty sound of a dial tone. I smoke the cigarette about halfway down, still sitting in my car as my nerves settle. I wipe my eyes with the heels of my hands. They smell like smoke. I survived that. So that's something. Surviving is good. Means I can keep living if I want. Keep surviving. And then at the end of the chapter, after a lesbian who works at the coroner's office has gone and given the file to Andy that he needs because they've got solidarity, he thinks about his grandmother. I think about my own grandmother. I try to remember how she looked. She died just before the war. Soft eyes, blue like mine, gray hair always pinned back. I imagine her calling me the name the coroner called me, but it doesn't fit. It feels silly somehow. This ends up being a pretty key moment in the book because Andy was suicidal at the beginning of the book, and he only didn't act on those thoughts because a wealthy lesbian found him and knew that he had been kicked off the force because he was queer and wanted to hire him to investigate the potential murder of her partner. And the course of this book is Andy coming to understand how he can survive in the 1950s in San Francisco, a place where it is illegal to be someone like him. And the use of that word toward him is meant to like deeply crystallize those things for him. So if we think about the lenses, I think that this is just like a very different case from Heated Rivalry. So disgust, the use of the F word for the purposes of violence, is explicitly acknowledged in this book. So not only do we get the internal phenomenological like sensations of Andy, the anxiety feelings, like the racing heart, like crying because of this, we also get him thinking about how that word is used in a violent way. How it is targeted at queer men and how like it might be the last word that he ever hears. When we think about the literary purpose of this word, the character is this homophobic character. He definitely would call this guy that. The F word existed in the 1950s. It had been in use as a slur for gay men. And it also serves an important narrative purpose. This is the first time that Andy feels like called out directly in the real world outside of that like one awful night of his. And it makes him know that like I'm going to be this thing that the world doesn't like. And I don't have a support system and a family around me. And other than solving the case, finding a family, finding a way that he can survive in the world is the purpose of his character through the next two-thirds of the book. So this is a very important moment. It's not just thrown in there casually. And then in terms of reclamation and ownership, uh, Andy owns that word and the author owns that word. Did I feel hurt and slapped when I saw that word? Yes, particularly watching someone go through a lot of the feelings that I experience when I see that word. But did I dislike the book because it used that word? No. Do I wish that Rosen had just like somehow like censored it out or like turned back the resolution on that word a little bit? I don't know. I don't think that that passage would have landed in the same way if he hadn't used the word directly. Which is to say, just because something hurts doesn't mean it's bad. Like sometimes that's the point. And I don't want this to sound like, oh, well, Lavender House is good and Heated Rivalry is bad. I think these are all different spectrums, different lenses that we can analyze these texts through, and that it is subjective for every person who is reading the books where they're going to fall on those spectrums. I don't think that Rachel Reed is a bad person for having used the word, and I don't think Heated Rivalry is a bad book for having had it in it. If I had been a sensitivity reader on that book, I would have said, reconsider this. For Lavender House, I probably would have left a note saying, think about playing this scene a couple different ways where you use and don't use this word and see how it lands. I think it probably works best by using this word, but you should at least like try the other ways. Lavender House doesn't have any content warnings. It is a mystery thriller, and it's not particularly cozy or anything. I don't know that you would expect to have it in there. Heated Rivalry also doesn't have any content warnings, and being in a different genre, in the romance genre, I think that maybe it would have been advisable to have some kind of a content warning at the beginning of the book. And that's just two texts that I've read recently. When I brought this up when talking about Game Changer and Heated Rivalry, more than one person brought up the use of that word in books written by gay men in like a kinky way, where it is like maybe more of a darker romance, and there are characters who like to call other characters that word or be called that word. There's a lot of complexity in the use of that word. I think that the lenses that I have discussed here are useful for analyzing the use of that word and figuring out like where you fall on the use of that word, and hopefully helping you empathize with and understand where other people are coming from when they are thinking about and talking about the use of that word. Like I said at the beginning, I don't think that there is one right or wrong answer here. I certainly don't think that I have all the right answers. Might have some wrong answers. And this is definitely not a prescription. I would not want someone to like take this video and send it to an author who's used this word and saying like, oh, well, look, Carter says you shouldn't use that word. That's not what I'm saying. I do think that authors should consider, like very carefully consider, when they are going to use it, especially given their status in oppressive systems, using violent language about marginalized groups. And I certainly think sensitivity readers can help with that if you don't have all of the perspective of being in one of those marginalized communities. But I also think just having the lenses of like, sometimes words do violence. So, some words are owned by certain groups of people. These are my like narrative goals and why I have them. And I'm, a little bit of internal psychologizing of yourself. Like that can be helpful in coming to, a theory of the case on how you might want to or not use words like that in your books. This has been a heavy topic, and it took a while for me to record this video, so my coffee is cold now. Lukewarm at best. I hope that this was a productive and interesting discussion for people. And like I said at the beginning, I'm going to have a weather eye on the comments. So please be kind and respectful to other people and to yourself while you are in the comment section of this video. Thank you very much for being with me today, and I'll see you next week.